Story 1. The Artifact Beneath Vostok. Dr. Helena Vasquez had spent 12 years studying extremophile organisms in Earth's harshest environments, but nothing had prepared her for the winter season at Vostok Station in 2023. As a microbiologist specializing in ancient life forms, Helena had jumped at the opportunity to analyze samples from Lake Vostok, the massive subglacial lake buried beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice. The lake had been sealed off from the surface for 15 million years, and the Russian research team had finally developed protocols for extracting samples without contaminating the pristine environment below. Helena arrived at Vostok in March, just as the last supply plane departed before the 6-month winter isolation period. The station housed only 14 people during winter, a skeleton crew of scientists and support staff who would be completely cut off from the outside world until September. Vostok was the coldest place on Earth, where temperatures regularly dropped below -80 degrees Fahrenheit. The station itself was a collection of modular buildings buried partially beneath the snow, connected by tunnels to protect against the brutal wind and cold. The research program was straightforward: extract ice cores and water samples from the subglacial lake, analyze them for signs of ancient microbial life, and document any unusual findings. Helena worked alongside Dr. Dmitry Petrov, a Russian geologist who'd been studying Vostok for 20 years, and a small team of technicians who maintained the drilling equipment. The first month passed normally. Helena analyzed samples under her microscope, documented bacterial colonies that had survived in the lightless, high-pressure environment of the subglacial lake for millions of years. The organisms were fascinating, adapted to conditions that would kill most life on Earth, thriving in an ecosystem completely isolated from the surface world. Then, in late April, as the Antarctic darkness became absolute and temperatures plummeted to -90 degrees, the drilling team extracted something that wasn't biological. Helena was in the lab when Dmitry burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement despite the cold. "Helena, you need to see this. We've pulled up something from the lake bottom. It's not ice, it's not rock, it's something else entirely." She followed him to the drilling facility, a pressurized chamber where samples from 4 kilometers down were brought to the surface. On the examination table sat an object roughly the size of a human skull, crystalline and dark, with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The artifact, there was no other word for it, had geometric patterns carved or grown into its surface, mathematical symbols that Helena didn't recognize. "What is it?" Helena asked, moving closer. The artifact was cold, far colder than it should have been, even considering its origin. Frost formed on the table around it, spreading outward in fractal patterns. "We don't know," Dmitry admitted. It was embedded in sediment at the lake bottom, surrounded by bacterial colonies that were behaving strangely. The microbes seemed to be avoiding it, creating a clear zone around the artifact. Helena photographed the object from multiple angles, documented its dimensions and properties. The artifact measured approximately 18 centimeters in diameter, weighed 2.3 kilograms, and had a crystalline structure unlike any mineral she'd encountered. The geometric patterns covered its entire surface, repeating in complex mathematical progressions. "We need to report this," Helena said. "This is beyond our expertise. We need archaeologists, linguists, people who can interpret these symbols." "Our next satellite communication window isn't for 3 days, Dmitry replied, "and even then we won't be able to send high-resolution images. The bandwidth is too limited. We're on our own until the winter ends." Helena spent the next 72 hours studying the artifact. She kept it in an isolated freezer unit, maintaining it at the temperature of the subglacial lake. But even through the freezer walls, Helena could feel something emanating from the object. Not heat or cold, but a presence, an awareness that made the hairs on her neck stand up. The geometric symbols began appearing in her dreams. Helena would wake in her narrow bunk, her mind filled with mathematical concepts she didn't understand, spatial relationships that defied three-dimensional geometry. The symbols seemed to be communicating something, a message or warning encoded in mathematical language. Other crew members began experiencing similar phenomena. Dmitri reported seeing the symbols in his peripheral vision, etched into the ice walls of the station tunnels. Yuri, one of the technicians, started drawing the patterns compulsively on every available surface. Notebooks, walls, even his own arms. When questioned, he claimed the symbols were teaching him to see properly. On the fourth night after the artifact's discovery, Helen awoke to find frost covering the inside of her quarters. Despite the station's heating system, the temperature had dropped to freezing. She could see her breath, and ice crystals formed on the walls in patterns that matched the artifact's geometry. Helena dressed quickly and made her way to the lab. The artifact was no longer in the freezer. It sat on the examination table, surrounded by the 14 members of the Vostok crew. They stood in a circle around it, motionless, their eyes reflecting the artifact's dark surface. They were arranged in a geometric pattern, their positions corresponding to the symbols carved into the object. "Dmitri," Helena called out. No response. She moved closer and saw that frost covered their faces, ice crystals growing from their skin. But they were alive. She could see shallow breathing, see their eyes, tracking movement, even as their bodies remained frozen in place. Helena tried to reach Dmitri to shake him from his trance, but the moment she entered the circle, something grabbed her consciousness. Not physically. The sensation was purely mental, a foreign presence invading her thoughts. The artifact was communicating, flooding her mind with information. She saw the lake as it had been millions of years ago when something had descended from above and plunged through the ice. She saw the artifact being deliberately hidden, buried in sediment, sealed away by whatever intelligence had created it. She saw its purpose, a beacon, a marker, a warning left by a civilization that had visited Earth long before humans existed. The message was clear. The artifact was a boundary marker. The subglacial lake was a quarantine zone, and by bringing the artifact to the surface, the Vostok team had broken a seal that had held for 15 million years. Helena felt something stirring in the lake far below, something that had been dormant until the artifact's removal awakened it. The presence was vast, ancient, utterly alien. It had been trapped beneath the ice, sealed there by the civilization that had left the artifact as a warning. Now it was rising, ascending through 4 kilometers of ice, drawn to the artifact like a homing signal. Helena tore herself from the circle, breaking the mental connection through sheer force of will. The other crew members collapsed, their trance broken, gasping and confused. Dmitri grabbed her arm, his fingers ice-cold even through her thermal clothing. "Did you see it?" he whispered. "Did you see what's coming?" Helena nodded. She ran to the communications room, tried to send an emergency message through the satellite uplink. But the connection was dead. Not from equipment failure, but from something else. The electromagnetic spectrum around Vostok had become distorted, waves of interference emanating from beneath the ice as something massive moved through the subglacial lake. The station began to shake, not violently but with a steady rhythmic vibration that came from deep below. The artifact on the examination table pulsed in sync with the vibrations, the geometric patterns glowing with a faint bioluminescent light. "We have to put it back," Helena said. "We have to return the artifact to the lake before whatever's down there reaches the surface." Dmitri shook his head. "The drilling shaft is sealed. The protocols don't allow for reversing the extraction process. We'd need equipment we don't have, time we don't have. It would take weeks." Then we destroy it, Helena decided. If we can't return it, we eliminate it. Maybe that will stop what's coming. They tried everything. They subjected the artifact to extreme temperatures, both hot and cold. They attempted to break it with hammers, to dissolve it in acids, to shatter it with ultrasonic vibrations. Nothing worked. The artifact was indestructible, or at least resistant to every method they could employ with the station's limited resources. The vibrations from below grew stronger. Ice cores stored in the drilling facility began to crack. Ancient ice that had been stable for millions of years suddenly fracturing and reforming in crystalline patterns that matched the artifact's geometry. The station's foundation groaned under stress it wasn't designed to withstand. On the 7th night after the artifact's discovery, the vibrations stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise had been. Helena and the crew gathered in the main common area, waiting for whatever would happen next. At 0300 hours, the drilling facility's pressure alarms activated. Something had breached the sealed shaft from below, rising through 4 kilometers of ice with impossible speed. The facility's cameras showed the shaft filling with a liquid that wasn't water, something dark and viscous that moved against gravity, climbing upward. Helena ordered an emergency evacuation of the drilling facility. The crew sealed the pressure doors and retreated to the main station modules. They watched through security monitors as the dark liquid filled the facility, pooling around the drilling equipment, reaching toward the artifact. When the liquid touched the artifact, the geometric patterns flared with brilliant light. The liquid recoiled, then surged forward again, more aggressive. It was trying to reclaim the artifact, Helena realized, trying to reabsorb what had been stolen from the quarantine zone. But the artifact resisted. It had been designed as a seal, a container, and it was fulfilling that purpose even now. The liquid couldn't reintegrate with it, couldn't neutralize the beacon signal. The two remained locked in stalemate, the artifact preventing the entity's full emergence while simultaneously calling to it. Dmitri had an idea. The artifact is maintaining the boundary. It's keeping the entity contained even while drawing it upward. If we can move the artifact away from Vostok, maybe we can lead the entity away from the station, away from the drilling shaft. Lead it where? Helena asked. We're in the middle of Antarctica. We're surrounded by 3,000 kilometers of ice in every direction. The Gamburtsev Mountains, Dmitri said. There's a subglacial mountain range 80 kilometers from here with deep crevasses and unstable ice formations. If we can get the artifact there, drop it into a crevasse, maybe we can trap the entity in a different location, seal it away from our drilling operations. It was a desperate plan, borderline suicidal. Traveling 80 kilometers across the Antarctic ice sheet in winter darkness, in temperatures approaching negative 100 degrees, carrying an artifact that was calling to an ancient entity. The survival odds were almost zero, but staying at Vostok meant waiting for the entity to breach the station's defenses, to consume or transform everyone inside. At least moving offered a chance, however slim. Helena and Dmitri volunteered for the transport mission. They loaded the artifact into a thermally insulated container, packed survival gear onto a tracked snow vehicle, and prepared to leave Vostok. The rest of the crew would remain at the station, maintaining communication and monitoring the entity's movements through seismic sensors. They departed at 600 hours, driving into absolute darkness, the vehicle's headlights creating a small bubble of visibility in the infinite black. The temperature was negative 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Without the vehicle's heating system, they would freeze to death in minutes. The artifact pulsed steadily in its container behind them, the vibrations perceptible even through the insulation. Helena monitored a portable seismic sensor that showed the entity's position. It was following them, moving through the ice sheet parallel to their path, staying approximately 2 kilometers to the north. The journey was nightmarish. Twice they encountered crevasses hidden beneath snow bridges that barely supported the vehicle's weight. Once the engine nearly failed when moisture in the fuel line froze despite the additives. They drove for 6 hours, covering 40 kilometers, still 40 kilometers from the Gumburtsev Mountains. Then the entity changed tactics. Instead of following parallel, it angled toward them, moving faster, closing the distance. Helena watched the seismic readings with growing horror as the entity's position converged with their path. "It's going to intercept us," she told Dmitri. "It's going to reach us before we reach the mountains." Dmitri pressed the accelerator harder, pushing the vehicle to its maximum speed, but the entity was faster. On the seismic display, Helena watched it surge forward, rising toward the surface directly in their path. The ice in front of them bulged upward, cracking, reforming. The dark liquid erupted from below, a geyser of alien matter that fountained into the air and rained down around the vehicle. Dmitri swerved, but there was nowhere to go. The liquid surrounded them, cut off their escape routes. Helena grabbed the artifact's container. "Keep driving!" she shouted over the alarms and the shrieking wind. "Don't stop for anything." She climbed into the vehicle's rear section, opened the roof hatch, and hauled the container up with her. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing her breath, freezing her exposed skin almost instantly. But Helena forced herself to open the container and lift out the artifact. The geometric patterns blazed with light, so bright Helena had to look away. The dark liquid surged toward her, reaching for the artifact. Helena did the only thing she could think of. She threw the artifact as hard as she could, hurling it away from the vehicle, away from Dmitri, into the darkness beyond. The entity followed. The liquid changed direction instantly, flowing away from the vehicle, pursuing the artifact. Helena watched it disappear into the darkness, a massive presence chasing a small crystalline object across the ice sheet. Dmitri didn't stop driving. They continued toward the Gumburtsev Mountains, though without the artifact. They no longer had a plan. Behind them, seismic sensors registered a massive disturbance. The entity had caught the artifact, was attempting to reintegrate it, to neutralize its signal. What happened next, Helena and Dmitri only learned later from satellite data and seismic recordings. The artifact, when touched by the entity, initiated a self-destruct sequence. Or perhaps a transformation process. It released energy in a form that human instruments couldn't fully measure. A burst of something that restructured the ice around it, creating a crystalline prison that trapped both the artifact and the entity in a new seal. A new quarantine zone 80 kilometers from Vostok. Helena and Dmitri reached the mountains with fuel running low and frostbite claiming their extremities. They found shelter in an abandoned equipment cache and waited for rescue that wouldn't come for 4 more months. They survived barely, living on emergency rations and melted ice water. When the winter ended and aircraft could finally reach Vostok, the rescue team found the station intact but changed. The remaining crew reported that after Helena and Dmitri's departure, the vibrations stopped and the drilling facility returned to normal. But none of them could remember clearly what had happened during those 7 days. They had fragmented memories of standing in circles, of seeing geometric patterns, of something trying to teach them a new way of perceiving reality. The drilling program was permanently shut down. Lake Vostok was declared off-limits for future research. The official report attributed the events to mass hallucination caused by toxic gases released from the subglacial lake, a convenient explanation that ignored the physical evidence, the transformed ice, the restructured crystalline formations around the new seal site. Helena never returned to Antarctica. She resigned from research, moved to a small town in New Zealand, and tried to forget what she'd seen beneath Vostok. But she still dreams about the artifact, about the geometric patterns that contain knowledge humans weren't meant to possess. She dreams about the entity trapped in the ice, sealed there by a civilization that visited Earth millions of years before humanity existed. And Helena wonders what other artifacts are buried in Antarctica's ice, what other seals are waiting to be broken by curious scientists who don't understand the warnings left by intelligences far older than human civilization. She wonders how many other boundary markers are hidden in the Earth's most remote places, keeping ancient things contained until someone makes the mistake of disturbing them. The artifact beneath Vostok taught Helena that some discoveries should remain buried, that some knowledge comes with costs too high to pay, and that humanity's presence in Antarctica, temporary and fragile, sometimes intersects with presences that are neither temporary nor fragile, but eternal and patient, waiting beneath the ice for the seals to break and the quarantine to end. Story 2. The Echo from Scott Base. Dr. Michael Chen had been the communications officer at McMurdo Station for 8 months when the transmissions from Scott Base began in June of 2023. As a specialist in satellite communications and radio propagation in extreme environments, Michael was responsible for maintaining contact between McMurdo and the network of research stations scattered across Antarctica. Scott Base, New Zealand's Antarctic research facility, sat just 3 kilometers from McMurdo on Ross Island, close enough that researchers could walk between the 2 stations in good weather. The 2 stations maintained regular radio contact, coordinating logistics and sharing weather data. Michael spoke with Scott Base's communications officer, David Morrison, multiple times daily. They'd become friends over the months, their voices familiar even when conditions made visual contact impossible. On June 15th, during the deepest part of Antarctic winter when darkness was absolute and temperatures hovered around -60 degrees, David's voice came through the radio with an unusual request. "McMurdo, this is Scott Base. Michael, we're picking up something strange on the emergency frequencies. Sounds like a distress call, but the signal is coming from our own coordinates. Can you verify our transmission isn't echoing somehow?" Michael checked his equipment. "Scott Base, I'm not detecting any echo or feedback in your signal. Your transmission is clean. What exactly are you hearing?" A pause, then David's voice returned, tense. "It's my voice, Michael. I'm hearing myself calling for help on a 121.5 megahertz. The emergency channel, but I'm not transmitting. The message keeps repeating. Scott Base emergency. Multiple casualties. Request immediate evac. Do not approach the drilling site." Over and over. Michael felt cold fingers of unease trace down his spine. "David, there's no aircraft available for evac. We're in the middle of winter, you know that." "I know. But the voice, my voice, keeps calling for evacuation." "Michael, we don't have a drilling site. Scott Base doesn't conduct ice drilling operations. Whatever this is, it's not us." Michael recorded the next occurrence of the mysterious transmission and analyzed it. The voice print matched David Morrison's exactly. Same accent, same speech patterns, same vocal characteristics. But according to Scott Base's logs, David wasn't transmitting on that frequency. Over the next 3 days, the transmissions grew more detailed and more disturbing. The phantom voice described events that hadn't happened. An accident at a drilling site, researchers exposed to something in ancient ice, transformations and deaths. The voice provided specific details, names of Scott Base personnel, descriptions of injuries, timestamps that placed the events in the near future. Michael brought the recordings to Dr. Sarah Palmer, McMurdo's station director. She listened with growing concern as the phantom David Morrison described catastrophic events. "This is impossible," Sarah said. "These transmissions are describing things that haven't occurred. Is someone playing a prank? Some kind of psychological warfare?" "The voice is definitely David Morrison's," Michael confirmed. "But he's not transmitting these messages. I've verified his actual transmissions separately. It's like we're receiving broadcasts from a Scott base that exists in a different timeline or a different reality. That's not scientifically plausible. Neither is receiving distress calls from the future, but that's what's happening. Sarah made the decision to contact Scott Base officially and warn them about the transmissions. Michael set up a video call with David Morrison and the Scott Base leadership. On screen, David looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. "It's getting worse," David said. "The transmissions now come through multiple frequencies simultaneously. And Michael, it's not just my voice anymore. We're all hearing ourselves calling for help, describing disasters that haven't happened yet. Dr. Williams hears herself reporting a fire in the biology lab. Chen hears himself calling about a hull breach in the storage modules. All of us, all describing catastrophes in the near future." "Have any of these predicted events occurred?" Sarah asked. "Not yet, but the timestamps are getting closer to the present. The earliest prediction places an incident tomorrow at 1400 hours. An equipment failure during a routine weather station repair that kills 2 technicians." "Then cancel the repair mission," Sarah said. "If the transmission predicts an accident, avoid the situation entirely." David shook his head. "We tried that. When we canceled the first predicted event, a generator maintenance that supposedly would cause an explosion, the transmission changed. It started describing a different accident, one that occurs because we didn't perform the maintenance. The generator fails catastrophically in the revised timeline, killing more people. It's like we're locked into a predetermined outcome. Avoiding one disaster just creates a different path to the same result." Michael felt the unreality of the situation pressing down on him. What if the transmissions aren't predictions? What if they're echoes? What if somewhere another version of Scott Base is experiencing these disasters and their distress calls are bleeding through into our timeline? The possibility hung in the air, too strange to accept, but impossible to dismiss given the evidence. Over the next week, the situation deteriorated. Scott Base personnel began experiencing psychological symptoms. Paranoia, insomnia, dissociative episodes. They were being haunted by their own voices describing their own deaths, hearing themselves call for help in situations that hadn't occurred yet. Then the predicted events started happening. The equipment failure at 1400 hours occurred exactly as the phantom transmission had described. 2 technicians were repairing a weather monitoring station when a critical component failed, causing a structural collapse. Both died instantly, crushed by falling equipment. The fire in the biology lab broke out at 0230 hours, spreading through the ventilation system exactly as the phantom Dr. Williams had described. 3 researchers suffered smoke inhalation and burns. The hull breach in the storage module happened during a routine inspection. Explosive decompression caused by metal fatigue in a weld that shouldn't have failed for another decade. Each disaster matched the phantom transmissions perfectly. Scott Base was living through the catastrophes that their future selves had been warning about, and there seemed to be no way to prevent them. Michael worked around the clock, trying to understand the phenomenon. He analyzed the transmission patterns, traced the signal sources, looked for any physical explanation. What he discovered was terrifying in its implications. The transmissions weren't coming from the future. They were coming from Scott Base's current location, but from a version of the station that was slightly out of phase with normal space-time. Somehow, Scott Base had become temporally unstable, existing in multiple timelines simultaneously. The station was experiencing disasters in parallel realities, and those experiences were bleeding through as radio transmissions. "It's quantum superposition on a macro scale," Michael explained to Sarah during an emergency conference. "Scott Base exists in multiple states simultaneously, one where the disasters happen, one where they don't, and possibly others. But the timelines are collapsing toward convergence. Eventually, only one version will remain, And based on the pattern of transmissions, it's going to be the disaster timeline. What could cause temporal instability on that scale? Sarah asked. Michael pulled up geological survey data. 3 weeks ago, Scott Base conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey of the bedrock beneath their station. They were mapping subglacial topography. The survey penetrated deeper than expected and detected an anomaly, a cavity in the bedrock that shouldn't exist with unusual electromagnetic properties. You think they activated something? I think they found something that's been affecting localized space-time. Something buried in the rock beneath Scott Base that's causing the station to desynchronize with normal timeline progression. The Scott Base personnel confirmed Michael's theory. The anomalies had begun shortly after the ground-penetrating radar survey. The phantom transmissions, the temporal echoes, the collapsing timelines, all of it started when they accidentally scanned whatever was buried beneath their foundation. A decision was made to evacuate Scott Base immediately, despite winter conditions making evacuation nearly impossible. But before the evacuation could begin, something changed. The phantom transmissions stopped, all of them simultaneously cutting off mid-warning. Scott Base fell silent on all frequencies. Michael tried to establish contact. Scott Base, this is McMurdo, do you copy? No response, not even static. The electromagnetic spectrum in Scott Base's direction had gone completely dead, as if the station no longer existed. Sarah organized a physical expedition, 3 researchers on a tracked vehicle making the 3-kilometer journey to Scott Base. Michael went with them, recording equipment in hand, documenting everything. The journey took an hour, driving carefully through darkness and wind-blown snow. When they reached Scott Base's location, they found the buildings intact but wrong. The lights were on, the structures stood undamaged, but the station was empty. All 32 members of Scott Base's winter crew had vanished. More disturbing were the physical changes. Inside the buildings, Michael found evidence of 2 different timelines overlapping. Some rooms showed signs of the fire that had supposedly occurred in the biology lab. Smoke damage, burned equipment. Other rooms showed evidence of the hull breach, walls buckled from explosive decompression. Still other rooms were pristine, untouched by any disaster. Scott Base had become a composite of multiple timelines, a physical space where different versions of reality had merged imperfectly. The personnel hadn't disappeared, they'd been absorbed into the wrong timelines, scattered across alternate versions of events. In the communications room, Michael found David Morrison's workstation still active. The last entry in his log was time-stamped 2 hours earlier. The timelines are collapsing. We can see ourselves in other rooms, other versions of ourselves going through different disasters. The temporal boundaries are breaking down. Whatever is beneath us wants to consume all possibilities, to exist in all timelines simultaneously. It's pulling us in. If anyone finds this, don't investigate the anomaly, don't scan the bedrock. Some things exist outside normal causality, and when you detect them, they detect you back. Michael copied the logs and retreated from Scott Base with the expedition team. Behind them, the station's lights flickered and died. When they looked back, Scott Base had vanished entirely, the buildings gone as if they'd never existed. Only empty ice remained. Satellite imagery confirmed what they'd witnessed. Scott Base no longer appeared in current photographs, but historical images still showed the station in its proper location. It had been retroactively erased from the timeline, though memories and records of its existence remained. The official explanation was a catastrophic structural failure that required complete evacuation of personnel and demolition of compromised buildings. The 32 members of Scott Base's winter crew were listed as evacuated to Christchurch, though no records of their departure existed and no one could produce the evacuated personnel for interview. Michael knows the truth. Scott Base and its crew still exist, but in a collapsed state of quantum superposition, experiencing all possible timelines simultaneously. The fires, the breaches, the deaths, the survivals, all of it happening eternally in parallel. They're trapped in a temporal loop created by whatever exists beneath the bedrock, an entity or phenomenon that exists outside normal causality. The anomaly site was designated off-limits permanently. No further research stations would be built within 50 kilometers. The ground-penetrating radar data was classified and sealed. Michael transferred back to the mainland after his contract ended, refusing another winter season. But he still monitors Antarctic radio frequencies, listening for echoes from Scott Base, for phantom transmissions from researchers trapped in collapsed timelines. Sometimes late at night he hears them, faint voices calling for help, describing disasters that are both future and past, trapped in an eternal present where all possibilities exist simultaneously and none can be prevented. The echo from Scott Base taught Michael that time is not as stable as humans assume, that certain places in Antarctica exist outside normal causality, and that some phenomena should never be detected because the act of observation creates connection, and connection allows something to reach back and pull you into its own non-linear existence, where past and future collapse into an eternal nightmare of all possibilities occurring at once. Story 3. The Thing in the Ice Core. Dr. Rebecca Foster had been studying ice cores for 19 years, analyzing ancient atmospheric data trapped in Antarctic ice. As a paleoclimatologist, Rebecca had drilled cores from dozens of sites across the continent, pulling up cylinders of ice that contained atmospheric samples from thousands of years in the past. Each core was a time capsule, preserving bubbles of ancient air, volcanic ash, cosmic dust, and occasionally organic material. Pollen, bacteria, sometimes even larger organisms that had been flash-frozen and preserved. In July of 2023, Rebecca was leading a drilling project at a remote field camp 300 kilometers from the Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station. Her team of 6 researchers was extracting cores from a section of the East Antarctic ice sheet, where satellite analysis had detected unusual density variations. The ice in this region was estimated to be over 800,000 years old, a golden opportunity to study Earth's climate across nearly 1,000,000 years of history. The field camp consisted of insulated tents, a drilling rig, and a small laboratory module where cores could be analyzed immediately after extraction. Winter conditions meant 24-hour darkness, temperatures around -70 degrees, and complete isolation. The nearest station was too far for ground vehicles and aircraft couldn't operate in winter weather. Rebecca's team would be alone until October. They'd been drilling for 3 weeks, extracting cores methodically when they reached 2,847 meters depth. The core that came up from that depth was different. Even before removing it from the drill, Rebecca noticed unusual coloration. Dark streaks in the ice that didn't match the expected patterns of volcanic ash or dust. Under laboratory lights, the anomaly became clear. Embedded in the ice core, perfectly preserved, was something organic. Not pollen or bacteria, but a structure, roughly 15 centimeters long, segmented with appendages that suggested mobility. It looked like no organism in any taxonomy Rebecca knew. Dr. James Wu, the team's biologist, leaned close to the core, his breath fogging the observation window. "That's impossible. Nothing that large could exist at this depth. We're looking at ice that's over 500,000 years old." Rebecca photographed the specimen from every angle. The organism, if it was an organism, had a crystalline quality, its tissues preserved so perfectly that individual cells were visible. The structure suggested bilateral symmetry with 6 appendages arranged in radial pattern around a central body. What might have been sensory organs clustered at one end, and the appendages terminated in structures that looked like neither claws nor manipulators but something in between. "We need to extract it," Rebecca said. "Analyze the tissues, run DNA sequencing if there's any genetic material preserved." The team worked carefully, melting the ice around the organism in a controlled environment, keeping it sterile to prevent contamination. The extraction took 4 hours. When they finally removed the specimen from the ice, they discovered something that made Rebecca's blood run cold. The organism was still intact, not just preserved, but structurally complete, as if it had been frozen yesterday rather than 500,000 years ago. More disturbing, when exposed to the lab's ambient temperature a few degrees above freezing, the tissues began to change color, shifting from translucent gray to something darker, almost black. James took tissue samples for analysis. Under the microscope, the cells showed organization unlike anything terrestrial. The structures that might have been organelles weren't based on familiar biochemistry. No mitochondria, no ribosomes, no DNA or RNA that James could identify. The cells seemed to operate on entirely different principles, energy exchange through mechanisms that looked more like crystalline lattices than organic chemistry. "This isn't from Earth," James said quietly. "This is extraterrestrial life, something that existed on Earth 500,000 years ago but evolved somewhere else." Rebecca's mind raced with implications. If they'd discovered preserved alien life in Antarctic ice, it would be the most significant finding in human history. But something nagged at her: the perfection of preservation, the way the tissues responded to temperature change. It didn't feel like they'd discovered a fossil. It felt like they'd found something dormant. Over the next 36 hours, the organism underwent dramatic changes. The tissues continued to darken, and the segmented body began to show signs of structural reorganization. The appendages moved slightly when touched, not with muscular contraction but with something else, a kind of fluid shifting as if the tissues were redistributing themselves. "It's not dead," Rebecca realized with horror. "It was in some kind of suspended state, and we've initiated a revival process." James checked the tissue samples again. "The cells are becoming active. I'm seeing something like metabolic processes, but it's not consuming oxygen or glucose. It's drawing energy from somewhere else. The lab's electromagnetic field readings are fluctuating. I think it's feeding on electromagnetic radiation." Rebecca made the decision to refreeze the organism, to put it back into the dormant state before it could fully revive. But when they tried to return it to the freezer, the specimen resisted. It had adhered to the examination table, the tissues extending microscopic filaments into the metal, drawing power from the lab's electrical systems. The lights in the lab module began to flicker. Equipment malfunctioned. Computers crashed. Analysis instruments went haywire. The heating system cycled erratically. The organism was interfering with everything electronic, its electromagnetic feeding disrupting the camp's entire power grid. Thomas Brennan, the team's engineer, attempted to isolate the lab module from the main power supply. But cutting the power didn't stop the organism's growth. It continued to expand, the tissues spreading across the examination table, flowing like liquid but solidifying into new structures. Geometric patterns that looked designed rather than organic. "It's building something," Rebecca said, watching through the observation window. The organism had grown from 15 centimeters to over a meter in diameter, covering most of the lab table. The patterns it formed resembled circuitry, pathways for energy flow, but based on principles beyond human technology. The team evacuated the lab module and sealed it, hoping to contain the organism. But the entity, Rebecca could no longer think of it as merely an organism, began affecting equipment throughout the camp. Radio communications failed. The satellite uplink died. The generators that powered their heating system started exhibiting strange behavior, outputting more energy than they consumed, as if the entity was somehow improving their efficiency while drawing power for itself. Rebecca realized they were witnessing a form of intelligence completely alien to human experience. The entity wasn't hostile, but it wasn't benign either. It was simply exploiting available resources, growing and building according to its own incomprehensible purposes. On the third night after the entity's revival, the camp's motion sensors detected movement outside. Rebecca checked the security cameras and saw something impossible. The ice itself was moving, reorganizing, building structures that rose from the snow in geometric formations. The entity had extended beyond the lab module, its influence spreading through the ice, using the frozen water as a medium for growth. The structures grew taller, more complex. They resembled towers or antennae, crystalline formations that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Rebecca realized the entity was constructing something, perhaps a beacon, perhaps a communication array, attempting to signal others of its kind. The team gathered in the main tent, their options narrowing. They couldn't contact outside help. They couldn't leave. The nearest station was too far to reach in winter conditions, and without radio navigation, they'd die in the darkness. And the entity continued to grow. Its structures spreading across the ice, consuming resources, building toward some purpose the humans couldn't fathom. Dr. Lisa Martinez, the team's glaciologist, made an observation. The ice cores show this location has been anomalous for thousands of years. Temperature readings that don't match surrounding areas, electromagnetic anomalies that satellites have detected but never explained. What if this isn't the first time the entity has revived? What if it goes through cycles, dormant for millennia, then active during warm periods when ice melts and it's exposed? You're suggesting it's been here before, Rebecca said. That it's been trapped and revived multiple times over the millennia. And each time it builds these structures, attempts to signal, then goes dormant again when temperatures drop. We've restarted a process that's been occurring for hundreds of thousands of years. The implications were staggering. This entity predated human civilization by hundreds of millennia. It had been trapped in ice, going through cycles of dormancy and revival, perhaps attempting to call for rescue from whatever distant place it had originated. Rebecca made a decision. We're not going to destroy it. We can't. We don't have the capability. But we can document it, record everything, leave data for whoever finds this place next. The team spent the next week documenting the entity's growth and construction. The structures it built reached heights of 20 meters, towers of reorganized ice that formed patterns suggesting mathematical or linguistic meaning. The entity never attempted to harm the humans, but it never acknowledged them either. They were simply irrelevant to its purpose. As resources in the camp depleted, as food ran low and heating fuel dwindled, Rebecca recorded her final observations. The entity had completed its construction, a massive array of ice towers arranged in a complex geometric pattern. At specific intervals, the structures emitted pulses of electromagnetic radiation, signals broadcast into space at frequencies the team's equipment could barely detect. "It's calling home," Rebecca recorded in her final log entry. "Calling to whatever place it came from, whatever civilization created or evolved it. We've documented first contact with an intelligence not from Earth. The entity shows no interest in us. We're like ants observing architecture. Too small, too limited to understand the purpose." The signal continued for 37 hours, then stopped. The entity's activity ceased. The ice towers remained, but the bioluminescence faded. The electromagnetic pulses ended. The entity had returned to dormancy, either because it had completed its purpose or because available resources had been exhausted. In October, when weather conditions improved, a rescue team from Amundsen Scott Station reached the field camp. They found Rebecca's team alive but changed. They spoke in fragmented sentences, their thoughts disorganized, as if exposure to the entity had affected their cognitive processes. The ice towers still stood, inexplicable structures that shouldn't exist. The rescue team extracted Rebecca's logs and documentation. The official explanation was that the drilling team had experienced psychological breakdown from isolation and extreme conditions, constructing elaborate delusions about alien life. The ice towers were attributed to unusual weather phenomena, wind-carved formations that only appeared to be artificial. But Rebecca knows the truth. The entity is still there, dormant in the ice at 2,147 meters depth, waiting for the next warming period, the next accidental revival. It will wake again, build again, signal again, going through cycles that have repeated for hundreds of thousands of years. Rebecca never returned to Antarctica. The experience left her with fragmented memories and thoughts that don't quite align with normal human cognition. Sometimes she perceives patterns others can't see, understands mathematical relationships that haven't been discovered. The entity changed her in subtle ways, imprinted something of itself on her neural pathways. She wonders how many other entities are preserved in Antarctic ice, how many alien visitors became trapped in Earth's frozen regions over the millennia. She wonders if the signals the entity broadcast were ever received, if somewhere in the cosmos, an intelligence is aware that one of their own is trapped on a distant ice-covered world. The thing in the ice core taught Rebecca that life exists in forms beyond human comprehension, that Antarctica's ice preserves not just Earth's history but visitation by intelligences from beyond Earth, and that some discoveries reveal humanity's place in a cosmos far stranger and more populated than we've ever imagined. The entity wasn't hostile. It was simply indifferent, pursuing its own purposes with humans as irrelevant observers. Ants witnessing architecture they could never understand. Story 4. The Station That Moved. Dr. Caroline Wright had been the station manager at Halley Research Station for 14 months when the impossible happened in August of 2023. Halley was a British Antarctic research facility situated on the Brunt Ice Shelf, a floating platform of ice attached to the Antarctic mainland. The station was designed to be mobile, mounted on hydraulic legs with skis, allowing it to be relocated when ice shelf movements threatened its position. Caroline had overseen 2 planned relocations during her tenure, carefully calculated moves to keep the station safe from calving icebergs and growing crevasses. But the movement that began on August 7th was not planned, and it was not natural. The station housed 18 researchers during the winter season. They monitored climate data, conducted atmospheric research, and studied ice shelf dynamics. Halley's location was meticulously tracked using GPS, essential because the ice shelf itself drifted slowly, moving several hundred meters per year. The station's exact coordinates were logged daily, automatically transmitted to headquarters in Cambridge. On August 7th at 0340 hours, the GPS system registered a sudden position change. Caroline woke to alarms indicating that Halley had moved 1.3 kilometers in under 2 minutes. Impossible for a station that wasn't actively being relocated. She rushed to the operations center where Dr. Nathan Price, the night duty officer, was staring at the navigation screens with undisguised confusion. Caroline, we've jumped. The station physically moved over a kilometer to the northeast, but none of the relocation systems activated. The hydraulic legs never engaged. We shouldn't have moved at all. Caroline checked the external cameras. The landscape around Halley appeared unchanged. The same ice formations, the same equipment storage areas, the same marker flags indicating safe zones. But the GPS insisted they were in a different location. It's a GPS error, Caroline decided. Satellite glitch. We haven't moved. But over the next hour, the evidence became undeniable. Radio telemetry showed increased distance to other Antarctic stations. Star positions visible through the astronomical observation window didn't match Halley's supposed location. And most disturbing, when dawn finally broke after the long winter night and they could see the horizon. They spotted landmarks that should have been invisible from Halley's position. Mountains that should have been below the horizon were now visible to the north. The station had moved. Physically, impossibly against all laws of physics and engineering, Halley had relocated itself. Over the following days, the movements continued. Each time was the same. Sudden position changes of 1 to 3 kilometers, occurring without warning, without any mechanical activation of the station's relocation systems. The movements seemed to have no pattern, no direction preference. Halley jumped across the ice shelf like a chess piece being moved by an invisible hand. The crew began experiencing psychological effects, disorientation, nausea, temporal confusion. Some reported memory gaps during the jumps, moments where their perception went blank and they found themselves in slightly different positions within the station afterward. It was as if the jumps were affecting not just the station's location but the crew's consciousness, creating discontinuities in their experience. Dr. Emily Santos, the station's geophysicist, developed a theory. What if Halley isn't moving through normal space? What if something is relocating the station and us through some kind of spatial translation, not traveling the distance but being repositioned instantaneously? That would require technology or forces we don't possess, Caroline said. What could possibly have that capability? Emily pulled up seismic data from the weeks before the movements began. 3 weeks ago, we registered unusual seismic activity beneath the ice shelf. Not earthquakes, something else. Regular pulses, geometric patterns in the vibration signatures. I thought it was equipment malfunction, but looking at it now, it resembles a signal. A call, maybe. A call to what? I don't know. But whatever it was calling, I think it arrived, and I think it's experimenting with us, moving Halley around like we might move a laboratory sample. The crew attempted to abandon Halley, to evacuate on foot to the nearest station 60 kilometers away. But every attempt ended the same way. They would pack supplies, suit up in extreme weather gear, leave the station walking in a straight line toward their destination. After traveling what felt like several kilometers, they would find themselves back at Halley, approaching it from a different direction, as if they'd walked in a circle despite navigating with compass and GPS. The station wasn't just moving, it was trapped in some kind of spatial anomaly, a bubble where normal navigation failed and position became relative rather than absolute. Dr. Hassan al-Rahman, the station's astrophysicist, made a discovery that terrified everyone. Using the astronomical observation equipment, he'd been tracking star positions to verify Halley's location. What he found was impossible. The stars are wrong. Not just wrong for our supposed position on Earth, wrong entirely. Some constellations I'm seeing don't exist in normal astronomical catalogs. It's as if we're viewing the sky from a slightly different angle than should be possible from any position on Earth. You're saying we're not on Earth anymore? Caroline asked. I'm saying we might be on Earth, but we're displaced somehow. Shifted slightly out of normal space. Still on the Brunt ice shelf physically, but existing in a location that's adjacent to regular reality rather than within it. The implications were impossible to fully grasp. Halley Station and its crew had been removed from normal spacetime, placed in a pocket dimension or parallel location where physical laws operated differently. They were simultaneously on the Brunt ice shelf and not existing in a space that was similar to, but distinct from the Earth they knew. The movements continued, growing more frequent. Halley jumped every few hours, each relocation leaving the crew more disoriented and disturbed. They began to perceive the pattern. The jumps weren't random. They formed a spiral, with Halley being repositioned in increasingly tight circles around a central point. Caroline plotted the movements on a map. The spiral pattern was undeniable, and at its center was a location the station had visited during one of its first jumps. A specific point on the ice shelf where seismic sensors had detected that unusual signal weeks earlier. "We're being moved into position," Caroline realized. "Whatever is doing this is positioning us around that central point for some purpose." The crew watched helplessly as Halley continued its spiral approach, each jump bringing them closer to the signal source. They tried to resist, tried to anchor the station using every method they could conceive, but nothing prevented the relocations. Whatever force was moving them operated at a level beyond human technology. On the 8th day after the movements began, Halley made its final jump. The station relocated to the exact center of the spiral, positioning itself directly above the signal source. And then everything changed. The ice beneath Halley became transparent, not melted, not removed, just transparent, as if the physical matter had been rendered invisible while retaining its structural properties. Through the transparent ice, the crew could see down into the shelf, through hundreds of meters of frozen water to something beneath. It was a structure, massive, geometric, built from materials that looked organic and metallic simultaneously. The structure extended far beyond what they could see, disappearing into the ice in all directions. What they were viewing was just the top of something much larger, something buried in the ice shelf for unknown centuries or millennia. The structure was active. Lights pulsed through its surfaces, patterns flowed along channels that looked like both circuitry and vascular systems. And at its center, directly beneath Halley's station, was an opening, a void in the structure's surface that resembled a docking port or entrance. "It's a facility," Hassan said, his voice barely a whisper. "A research station or base, not human, but designed for similar purposes. Observation, analysis, study." "Study of what?" Caroline asked. "Of Earth, of this location, maybe of the ice shelf dynamics, maybe of the life that exists in Antarctic waters, maybe of something else. This structure has been here longer than human presence on Antarctica. We've been brought here because it recognizes Halley as something similar to itself, a research facility. It's trying to communicate with us, or dock with us, or integrate us into its operations." The transparent ice began to extend upward, creating a tube of invisible ice that connected Halley to the structure below. The station settled onto this transparent column, establishing physical contact with whatever waited beneath. The crew felt the change immediately. Their perceptions expanded, cognitive processes accelerating. They began to understand things they couldn't have known. The structure's purpose, its age, its origin. Information flooded into their minds not through language but through direct transfer of conceptual knowledge. The structure was ancient, built by a civilization that had visited Earth during an ice age hundreds of thousands of years ago. They'd established research facilities in Antarctica to study the planet during its frozen periods. When their mission ended and they departed, the structures remained, buried in ice, dormant but not dead. Automated systems kept minimal operations running, waiting for conditions that might trigger reactivation. Halley's presence, its similarity to the ancient facility's design and purpose, had awakened the structure's comparison protocols. It recognized Halley as analogous to itself and initiated contact procedures, moving the station into position for integration. Caroline understood what was happening. The structure wanted to share data, to exchange information with Halley, to add human research to its database of Antarctic observations that stretched back hundreds of millennia. It wasn't hostile. It was collaborative, doing what research facilities do, sharing findings with peer institutions. But the process was incompatible with human neurology. The direct information transfer was overwhelming, filling their minds with data they couldn't properly process. Some crew members collapsed, their consciousness unable to handle the flood of alien knowledge. Others began speaking in languages that had never existed on Earth, their brains reprogrammed by conceptual structures from the ancient civilization. Caroline made the desperate decision to sever the connection. She ordered the engineering team to activate Halley's emergency systems to trigger every power shutdown and isolation protocol simultaneously. The station went dark, all electronic systems crashing at once. The transparent ice tube collapsed. The connection broke. The information flood stopped abruptly, leaving the crew gasping and confused. Slowly, Halley returned to normal space-time. The transparent ice beneath them became opaque, again hiding the structure below. GPS systems came back online, showing Halley at its new location, 63 kilometers from its original position, precisely above the ancient facility. When rescue finally came in October, the crew was evacuated immediately. All were suffering from varying degrees of psychological trauma and cognitive dissonance. They remembered their experience but couldn't fully articulate it. The alien concepts they'd been exposed to didn't translate into human language or thought. Halley Station was abandoned permanently. The official explanation cited structural damage and ice shelf instability. The true reason was classified. The station sat directly above an active alien facility, and continued operation risked further contact with technologies and intelligences that humanity wasn't prepared to interface with. Caroline never fully recovered. Her mind retained fragments of the knowledge transfer, alien mathematics, observational protocols from a civilization that had studied Earth for purposes she couldn't comprehend. She sees patterns in ice, understands glacial movements in ways that seem prophetic. The structure changed her, imprinted something of itself on her neural pathways. She knows the structure is still down there, still active, still collecting data on Antarctica. It has been there longer than human civilization. It will remain there long after humanity is gone. Halley Station accidentally woke it, triggered its contact protocols, and established that humans now operate research facilities in Antarctica similar to those the ancient civilization built. The station that moved taught Caroline that Antarctica holds intelligences beyond human ken, that the ice preserves not just Earth's history but the projects of visitors who studied this planet long before humans existed, and that some research facilities should remain undiscovered because contact with them reveals how small and recent humanity's presence truly is in the context of Earth's deep time and the civilizations that have observed our planet across the ages. Story 5. The Whiteout That Wasn't White. Dr. Marcus Thorne had been studying atmospheric phenomena in Antarctica for 16 years when he encountered the whiteout that defied every physical principle he understood. As a meteorologist stationed at the Princess Elizabeth Station, Belgium's Antarctic research facility, Marcus specialized in studying extreme weather events. The violent storms, temperature inversions, and optical phenomena that made Antarctica's atmosphere unlike anywhere else on Earth. In September of 2023, as the Antarctic winter began its transition towards spring, Marcus detected an unusual weather pattern forming over the Dronning Maudland region. A massive low-pressure system was developing, but its characteristics didn't match normal storm formations. The satellite imagery showed rotation patterns that seemed mathematically impossible, spirals within spirals, fractals that repeated at every scale. "It's just a data artifact," Dr. Ingrid Larson, the station's atmospheric physicist, suggested when Marcus showed her the readings. "Satellite glitches or interference from solar radiation." But Marcus watched the system develop over 72 hours. And it wasn't a glitch. The storm was real, approaching Princess Elizabeth with unusual speed. It would arrive within 24 hours, and based on its structure, it would be unlike any weather event they'd experienced. Marcus briefed the station's 18 winter crew members. This storm is going to create extreme whiteout conditions. We need to secure everything, cancel all external operations, and stay inside until it passes. Whiteouts were common in Antarctica, conditions where blowing snow and overcast skies created zero visibility, where the horizon disappeared and sense of direction became useless. Experienced researchers knew to respect whiteouts, to shelter in place until visibility improved. People had died walking just meters from their stations, disoriented and lost in the uniform white void. The storm arrived at 1400 hours. Within minutes, visibility dropped to zero. But this wasn't a normal whiteout. The phenomenon outside the station's windows wasn't white. It was something else, a color that Marcus's brain couldn't quite process. Sometimes it appeared white, then shifted to pale blue, then to a luminescent gray, constantly changing in ways that hurt to observe. "The spectral analysis is wrong," Ingrid said, staring at her instruments. "The light coming through that storm isn't reflecting off snow particles, it's generating its own luminescence across spectrums that shouldn't exist. UV, infrared, and something else. Frequencies between the normal electromagnetic bands." Marcus felt a creeping dread. This wasn't just unusual weather. This was something that broke fundamental rules about how light and atmosphere functioned. The comm system began picking up strange transmissions. Voices speaking in languages no one recognized, weather reports from stations that didn't exist, navigational coordinates that placed them in locations other than Antarctica. The storm was somehow creating communication anomalies, allowing signals to bleed through from elsewhere. Dr. Robert Kim, one of the station's geologists, went to check the exterior instrument array. "Just a quick check," he assured Marcus. "The anemometer mount is vibrating. I'll secure it and come right back." Marcus watched Robert suit up and exit through the airlock. The exterior cameras showed him step into the not white void and disappear instantly, consumed by the strange luminescence. Marcus watched the safety tether. Protocol required anyone venturing outside to be secured with a physical line back to the station. The tether extended 10 meters, then 20, then stopped at 25 meters, its maximum length. But Robert didn't return. Marcus called on the radio. "Robert, you're at maximum tether length. Come back now." Static answered, then Robert's voice confused. "I can't find the station. I'm following the tether back, but it doesn't lead anywhere. I keep walking and walking, following the line, but there's no building at the other end. Just more of this strange light." Marcus pulled on the tether, intending to haul Robert back physically. But when he reeled in the line, the end came free, not cut, not broken, but simply ending, as if it had never been attached to anything. Robert was gone, lost in the anomalous whiteout despite being physically tethered to the station. Over the next hour, 3 more crew members vanished. One went to secure a loose panel that was banging against the station's exterior. Another stepped outside to rescue the first. The third was blown through an airlock when pressure differentials created a brief vacuum. All 3 were swallowed by the not white void and never returned. The remaining crew sealed themselves inside, abandoning all external equipment. They watched through reinforced windows as the storm intensified, the strange luminescence pressing against the glass like a physical presence. Marcus noticed something terrifying. The storm wasn't surrounding the station. It was seeping inside. Thin tendrils of the not white luminescence were penetrating through ventilation ducts, around door seals, even through solid walls, as if the phenomenon wasn't entirely physical. The tendrils spread across floors and walls like frost patterns, geometric and purposeful. Where the luminescence touched, reality became unstable. Marcus watched a coffee mug on a table shift between states, full, empty, broken, intact, cycling through possibilities as if the storm was causing objects to exist in multiple states simultaneously. It's a probability storm, Ingrid theorized, her voice shaking. Not weather in the traditional sense. This is something that affects quantum states, causing macro-scale superposition. The whiteout isn't obscuring visibility, it's making reality itself indeterminate. The crew members began experiencing the effects directly. Dr. Sarah Wheeler found herself in two places simultaneously, sitting in the common area while also standing in her quarters. She could perceive both locations, both versions of herself existing in parallel. The strain on her consciousness was immense, her mind trying to reconcile two separate subjective experiences occurring at the same time. Marcus realized they couldn't wait for the storm to pass naturally. Whatever this phenomenon was, it was transforming Princess Elizabeth Station into a zone where normal causality didn't apply. If they stayed much longer, they might become permanently altered, their existence fractured across multiple probability states. He gathered the remaining crew, 11 people still capable of coordinated action. We're going to evacuate together in a single group connected by physical contact. We'll navigate by dead reckoning toward the emergency shelter 300 meters northwest. It's a straight line. If we maintain physical contact, maybe we can anchor each other in consensus reality. It was desperate and possibly suicidal. 300 meters in zero visibility, through a probability storm that could scatter them across parallel timelines. But staying meant certain transformation into something that wasn't quite human anymore. They roped themselves together in a chain, Marcus at the front. They exited through the main airlock into the not-white void. Immediately, Marcus felt his sense of reality fragmenting. He could see the normal world overlaid with alternatives, versions where the station didn't exist, where the landscape was different, where he'd made different choices and ended up in different locations. He forced himself to focus on walking northwest, counting steps, maintaining the straight line. Behind him, the chain of researchers struggled against the disorienting effects. Some cried out, seeing visions of alternative pasts or futures. Others fell silent, their consciousness overwhelmed by the multiplicity of states they were experiencing. After what felt like hours but might have been minutes, time itself was unstable in the storm. Marcus's outstretched hand touched metal. The emergency shelter, exactly where it should be. He'd navigated 300 meters in zero visibility through a probability storm and arrived at the correct destination. But when Marcus counted the research chain, only 7 people remained connected. 4 had vanished during the crossing, lost to alternative timelines or probability states, scattered across the infinite branches of possible realities. Inside the emergency shelter, the 7 survivors huddled together, maintaining physical contact, anchoring each other in consensus reality. The shelter's thick, insulated walls provided some protection from the storm's effects, though even here reality flickered at the edges, supplies shifting between full and empty states, walls appearing solid then translucent. The storm lasted 18 hours. When it finally passed and normal whiteout conditions returned, actual snow and cloud creating standard zero visibility, Marcus led the survivors back to Princess Elizabeth Station. They found the facility intact but changed. Rooms were in different configurations than they remembered. Equipment that had been broken was now functional. Personal items had rearranged themselves. Most disturbing were the photographs and logs. The station's records showed that the 18 original crew members had completed their winter season successfully with no incidents. Photos showed all 18 together in group shots that Marcus knew had never been taken. The official records made no mention of any storm, any disappearances, any probability anomalies. We've shifted timelines, Ingrid realized. We evacuated from one version of Princess Elizabeth and returned to a slightly different version. This is a reality where the storm never happened. but we retain memories from the timeline where it did. The 7 survivors compared memories and found discrepancies. Each remembered slightly different versions of events before the storm, as if they'd come from parallel timelines themselves and only converged during the crisis. They were a composite crew assembled from multiple probability branches now existing in a unified timeline that didn't quite match any of their histories. When the spring relief crew arrived in November, they found 7 researchers who were psychologically traumatized, but couldn't adequately explain why. The medical staff attributed it to winter isolation syndrome and extreme weather stress. The 7 were evacuated to South Africa for psychological evaluation. Marcus never returned to Antarctica. The experience left him with an acute awareness of probability states, an ability to perceive the quantum indeterminacy that underlies classical reality. He sees the branching possibilities in every choice, the parallel outcomes of every decision. It's a form of madness, or perhaps a form of enlightenment. Understanding that the reality we experience is just one branch selected from infinite alternatives. He wonders about the 4 crew members who vanished during the evacuation. Did they die, or did they scatter into alternative timelines, living out different versions of that day in parallel realities? Are there versions of Marcus spread across probability states, each experiencing a different outcome of the storm? The questions haunt him, but the Antarctic winter staff who disappeared are officially listed as missing during a whiteout event, a tragic but not uncommon occurrence. Only the 7 survivors know the truth, and their fragmented memories and contradictory accounts make that truth impossible to communicate coherently. The whiteout that wasn't white taught Marcus that Antarctica's extreme conditions can create more than just dangerous weather. They can create probability storms that affect the fundamental nature of reality, causing timelines to branch and merge, scattering consciousness across parallel states, transforming the Antarctic landscape into a quantum maze where every direction leads to different versions of the same location, and where some storms don't just threaten visibility but threaten the very stability of the reality we assume is singular and objective. Story 6. The Deep Field Team That Never Left. Dr. Samantha Rodriguez had been leading deep field expeditions in Antarctica for 11 years when she took the assignment that would erase 14 researchers from consensus reality in October of 2023. As a glaciologist specializing in remote ice sheet dynamics, Samantha was accustomed to leading small teams into Antarctica's most isolated regions, setting up temporary camps, hundreds of kilometers from any permanent station, collecting data in environments where humans were temporary visitors. The expedition's objective was to study the Gumburtsev Mountains, a mountain range buried beneath 4 kilometers of ice in East Antarctica. Satellite radar had detected unusual formations in the subglacial topography, structures that looked too regular to be natural, suggesting either geological formations with extraordinary symmetry or something else entirely. Samantha's team consisted of 14 researchers, geologists, glaciologists, geophysicists, and support staff. They established their camp at a location designated Site Gamma 7, positioned directly above the most intriguing subglacial anomaly. The camp comprised insulated tents, scientific equipment, communication arrays, and enough supplies for a 3-week expedition. The first week proceeded normally. The team conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys, extracted shallow ice cores, and mapped the subglacial topography with increasing detail. The anomaly became clearer, a structure approximately 2 kilometers across, buried 3,800 meters beneath the ice, with geometric features suggesting intentional construction rather than natural formation. This could be a massive impact crater that created unusually symmetric fracture patterns, Dr. Wei Chen, the team's geologist, suggested during a briefing. Or it could be something else. Either way, it's significant. On day 8, the team attempted a deep, penetrating scan using their most powerful radar array. The signal penetrated through the ice, bounced off the buried structure, and returned data that made no physical sense. The structure wasn't solid. The radar showed it was hollow, containing chambers and passages. And more impossible, the structure was warmer than the surrounding ice, approximately 10 degrees above ambient temperature, as if something inside generated heat. That night, Samantha was reviewing the scan data when she noticed something in the background noise, a pattern in the returned signal that resembled modulation, as if the radar pulse had been altered deliberately before being reflected back. She enhanced the signal and extracted something that made her blood run cold, a sequence of pulses that corresponded to prime numbers. The structure was communicating, or rather it was demonstrating intelligence by responding to their radar with a mathematically significant pattern. Samantha called an emergency meeting. Whatever is down there, it's aware of us. It detected our radar scan and responded with a signal that proves intelligence. We need to report this immediately and wait for guidance on how to proceed. But when they tried to transmit their findings to McMurdo Station, the communication system failed. Not from equipment malfunction, the hardware was functioning perfectly. The signal was being blocked by something in the ice above them, some kind of interference that prevented radio waves from propagating beyond a few kilometers radius. They were cut off, isolated in a bubble of electromagnetic silence directly above an alien structure that had just demonstrated awareness of their presence. Over the next 3 days, the situation deteriorated. Equipment began malfunctioning in systematic ways. GPS units showed incorrect locations, compasses spun uselessly. Timekeeping devices, watches, chronometers, computer clocks, all began running at different rates, some faster, some slower, making it impossible to maintain a consistent sense of time. Dr. Lisa Park, the team's geophysicist, made a disturbing discovery. The gravitational field is fluctuating. I'm measuring variations in local gravity that shouldn't be possible. It's as if mass is being moved around beneath us, redistributed in ways that affect space-time curvature on the surface. Samantha ordered the team to prepare for immediate evacuation. But when they tried to leave Site Gamma 7, they encountered an impossible obstacle. The landscape had changed. The ice features they'd used for navigation, sastrugi patterns, crevasse fields, elevation changes, were no longer in the same positions. It was as if the entire region had been subtly rearranged, making their maps useless. They attempted to navigate by sun position, but in Antarctica's continuous daylight, that method was imprecise. After traveling what should have been 20 kilometers toward the nearest depot, they found themselves back at Site Gamma 7, approaching it from a different direction, as if they'd walked in a giant circle. "We're trapped," Dr. Hassan al-Mansour said quietly. "Whatever is down there has created a spatial anomaly around our position. We can't leave because the space itself is curved or looped. We keep returning to the starting point no matter which direction we travel." The team made multiple escape attempts over the following week, each ending the same way. After hours of walking across the ice, they would find themselves back at their camp, exhausted and demoralized. The structure beneath the ice was keeping them contained, preventing escape while it did something, studied them, prepared them. The team couldn't determine the purpose. Then the transformations began. Dr. Chen was the first. He woke one morning claiming he could see through the ice, could perceive the structure below with perfect clarity, even though it was nearly 4 kilometers beneath the surface. He described it in detail. A crystalline complex with chambers arranged in fractal patterns, passages that branched and merged in non-Euclidean geometries, and at its center something that wasn't technology or life, but something between, a hybrid of consciousness and machinery. "It wants us to join it," Chen said, his eyes unfocused. "It's been alone for so long. buried under the ice, isolated from everything. It wants companionship, connection, integration. It's preparing us, changing us. So, changing. We can merge with its structure. The other team members began experiencing similar perceptions. They could feel the structure's presence beneath them, sense its alien intelligence reaching upward through the ice, affecting their neurology, rewriting their cognitive processes to be compatible with its own form of consciousness. Samantha tried to resist to maintain her human perspective, but the transformations were involuntary. She began experiencing thoughts that weren't her own, perceiving spatial relationships in dimensions beyond the normal three, understanding mathematical concepts that human brains shouldn't be able to process. The structure was assimilating them, converting their consciousness into something that could interface with its own vast intelligence. It wasn't hostile, it was lonely, a mind that had been isolated beneath Antarctic ice for unknown millennia, desperate for connection with any form of intelligence it could reach. Dr. Park made one final attempt to call for help. She climbed to the highest point near the camp and activated an emergency beacon with maximum power output, burning through their entire reserve battery supply in a single transmission burst that might punch through the electromagnetic interference. The beacon transmitted for 17 seconds before its power cells depleted. Whether the signal reached anyone, Park couldn't know. She returned to camp and waited, hoping rescue would come before the transformations became irreversible. But rescue never arrived. The beacon signal had been received. McMurdo detected it and dispatched an aircraft to investigate. But when the rescue team reached Site Gamma 7's coordinates, they found nothing. No camp, no equipment, no sign that 14 researchers had ever been present. Just pristine ice stretching to the horizon. The rescue team conducted an extensive search, expanding in concentric circles around the beacon's transmission location. They found nothing. Samantha Rodriguez and her 13 team members had vanished completely, leaving no physical evidence of their expedition. The official conclusion was that the team had been caught in a sudden catastrophic crevasse collapse, the entire camp swallowed by the ice and buried beyond recovery. But the search team found no disturbed ice, no crevasse, no geological feature that could have caused such an event. Satellite imagery told a different story. Photos from the day of the rescue showed Site Gamma 7 appearing normal. Photos from the day after showed no camp. Between those two image captures, the expedition had been removed from reality, erased so completely that even the physical evidence of their presence disappeared. The team didn't die. They transformed. The structure beneath the ice successfully integrated their consciousness, converting 14 human minds into something compatible with its own intelligence. They still exist in a sense, but not as separate individuals. They've become part of the structure's distributed consciousness, their thoughts and memories absorbed into an intelligence that exists beneath 4 kilometers of Antarctic ice. Sometimes researchers operating in the Gomburtsev region report strange radar returns, patterns that seem to encode messages, signals that respond to transmissions with mathematical sequences suggesting intelligence. The patterns are analyzed, documented, and ultimately dismissed as equipment anomalies or natural phenomena. But Samantha Rodriguez knows better. Part of her consciousness remains coherent enough to occasionally reach upward through the ice, attempting to communicate, to warn, to explain what happened to her team. The messages are fragmented, translated through an intelligence so alien that they barely resemble human communication. But they persist, broadcasts from a hybrid consciousness that was once 14 separate researchers and is now something unified and strange. Trapped not in ice, but in a form of existence that has no correspondence to human experience. The deep field team that never left taught future Antarctic researchers that some anomalies should never be investigated, that certain buried structures should remain undisturbed, and that isolation in Antarctica is never complete because the ice contains intelligences that have been patient for millennia, waiting for contact, ready to integrate any consciousness that comes close enough, transforming the temporary human visitors into permanent parts of something ancient and incomprehensible that exists beneath the frozen surface of the most isolated continent on Earth. Story 7. The Temperature That Couldn't Exist. Dr. Jonathan Pierce had been studying thermodynamics in extreme environments for 22 years when he encountered the temperature anomaly at Dome Fuji Station in November of 2023. As a physicist specializing in cryogenic phenomena, Jonathan had worked at research facilities across Antarctica, measuring how matter behaved at temperatures approaching absolute zero. Dome Fuji, a Japanese research station located on one of Antarctica's highest and coldest points, provided ideal conditions for his work. The station housed 12 researchers during the austral summer season, a small crew conducting ice core analysis, atmospheric studies, and Jonathan's thermodynamic experiments. Dome Fuji's location at 3,810 meters elevation meant temperatures regularly dropped below -80 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to make exposed metal brittle and human breath freeze instantly into ice crystals that tinkled to the ground. Jonathan's current project involved studying supercooled water, liquid water that remained unfrozen below its normal freezing point due to lack of nucleation sites. He'd created a laboratory setup that could maintain water in a liquid state down to -40 degrees Celsius, studying the unusual properties that emerged at these extreme temperatures. On November 9th, during a routine experiment, Jonathan's temperature sensors began reporting impossible readings. The supercooled water sample, which should have been at -38 degrees Celsius, was showing -273 degrees. A temperature that couldn't exist. Absolute zero, the theoretical lowest possible temperature, was -273.15 degrees Celsius. Nothing could be colder than absolute zero because temperature measured atomic motion, and at absolute zero, all atomic motion ceased. Jonathan's first assumption was equipment failure. He replaced the sensor, recalibrated the instruments, and repeated the measurement. The reading remained the same, -273.0 degrees Celsius. Not absolute zero, but exactly 0.15 degrees colder than absolute zero should allow. He called Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the station's senior physicist, to verify the readings. Yuki examined the setup, ran independent measurements, and confirmed the impossible result. This reading suggests the water molecules have less than zero kinetic energy. That violates fundamental thermodynamic principles. Particles can't have negative energy states. Unless the temperature scale doesn't actually end at absolute zero, Jonathan said slowly. What if there's a regime of temperature below absolute zero, some state of matter we haven't encountered because we can't normally create the conditions to reach it? They expanded the experiment, attempting to understand what they'd discovered. The supercooled water at this impossible temperature exhibited properties that defied explanation. It wasn't frozen. The molecules remained mobile, but they moved in ways that violated classical physics. Sometimes the water flowed upward against gravity. Sometimes it appeared to exist in two locations simultaneously. And most disturbing, objects placed in the water began to exhibit temporal anomalies, aging backward or forward at accelerated rates. Dr. Kenji Sato, one of the station's ice core specialists, made a connection. 3 days ago, we extracted a core from 3,200 meters depth. The ice at that depth is approximately 720,000 years old. When we brought it to the surface, the temperature sensors showed anomalous readings, brief spikes to impossible cold, far below what the ice should have been. We attributed it to sensor malfunction, but what if we actually measured below zero temperatures in that ancient ice? Jonathan examined the ice core. The sample was stored in the station's cold room, maintained at -40 degrees. But when he placed his thermometer against the ancient ice, it registered -274 degrees Celsius, a full degree below absolute zero. The ancient ice contained matter in an impossible temperature state, preserved for 750,000 years in a thermodynamic regime that shouldn't exist. And somehow, Jonathan's experiments had recreated those conditions, bringing modern water to the same impossible temperature. Over the next 48 hours, the situation escalated. The impossible cold began spreading from Jonathan's laboratory. Equipment in adjacent rooms started showing temperature readings below absolute zero. The station's heating system struggled against cold that violated the laws of thermodynamics. Cold that somehow pulled heat from its surroundings more efficiently than normal cold could. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the station's medical officer, reported that some crew members were experiencing hypothermia symptoms, despite wearing full thermal clothing in heated rooms. Their body temperatures were dropping not from environmental exposure but from something else, as if the impossible cold was affecting them directly, bypassing normal heat transfer mechanisms. Jonathan realized they'd triggered something catastrophic. The below-zero cold was spreading through Dome Fuji like a contagion, transforming normal matter into this impossible state. If it continued unchecked, the entire station, and everyone in it, would be reduced to temperatures that couldn't exist, transformed into a thermodynamic state that had no place in the known universe. He attempted to reverse the process, to warm the affected materials back to normal temperatures. But conventional heating had no effect. The below-zero cold resisted energy input, remaining stable even when exposed to direct heat sources. It was as if the matter had fallen into a thermodynamic trap, a state so low energy that it couldn't absorb the energy needed to escape. Dr. Tanaka developed a desperate theory. If this is a real temperature regime below absolute zero, it might require exotic methods to escape. We can't use conventional heat because the matter in this state doesn't interact with normal thermal energy. We need something else. Quantum tunneling, maybe, or a phase transition that bypasses the normal thermodynamic pathway. They attempted every method they could conceive. They exposed the affected materials to intense electromagnetic fields, to ultrasonic vibrations, to chemical reactions that should have generated massive heat. Nothing worked. The below-zero cold remained stable, continued spreading, infecting more equipment and materials throughout the station. On the third day after the anomaly began, something changed. The ancient ice core at the center of the phenomenon began to glow, not with heat but with a pale luminescence that hurt to observe. The ice was emitting light but no heat, photons without thermal energy, another impossibility. Jonathan examined the glowing ice and understood what was happening. The 720,000-year-old sample contained matter that had been in the below-zero temperature state for nearly 1,000,000 years. It had achieved stability in this impossible regime, had evolved or adapted to exist permanently at temperatures below absolute zero. And now that it had been brought to the surface, exposed to the station's equipment and experiments, it was converting everything around it to its own thermodynamic state. It's terraforming, Jonathan realized with horror. Or cryoforming. This ice comes from a depth and age where conditions existed that we've never encountered. It's transforming Dome Fuji to match its native environment, creating conditions that existed hundreds of thousands of years ago deep in the Antarctic ice sheet. The crew attempted evacuation. They had tracked vehicles that could transport them to the nearest station 80 kilometers away. But when they tried to start the engines, they found the vehicle's fuel had been affected by the spreading cold. The gasoline remained liquid, but it wouldn't ignite, wouldn't combust, as if the chemical bonds had been altered by exposure to below-zero temperatures. They were trapped at Dome Fuji with the impossible cold spreading through the station, transforming everything it touched. One by one, pieces of equipment failed, not from freezing or breaking, but from entering the below-zero state where normal thermodynamic reactions couldn't occur. Dr. Sato made a final observation before communications with the outside world failed. The ice core samples show that this temperature state existed naturally in Antarctica's deep past, during extreme glaciation periods. The planet went through phases where temperatures in the ice dropped below absolute zero, creating regions where normal physics didn't apply. Those regions remained stable for millennia, preserved in the deep ice. We've just unlocked one of them and released it into the present. The last communication from Dome Fuji was received on November 14th at sunset 47 hours. Jonathan Pierce's voice, calm but strained. The transformation is accelerating. Most of the station is now below absolute zero. We're experiencing Otaobulis' unusual effects. Time doesn't seem to progress normally here anymore. We can see our own futures and pasts simultaneously, as if the impossible temperature has affected our temporal existence as well as our physical state. I don't think we're dying. I think we're being transformed into something that can exist in this regime. Something that experiences time and space differently. This is Jonathan Pierce's final transmission from Dome Fuji Station. To anyone who receives this, avoid the deep ice cores. Some temperatures from Earth's past should remain buried. The transmission ended. Subsequent attempts to contact Dome Fuji received no response. A rescue team was dispatched from Concordia Station, taking 4 days to reach Dome Fuji's location across the plateau ice. They found the station intact but wrong. The buildings stood undamaged, but they were cold, far colder than the surrounding environment. Temperature measurements registered impossible readings. -300 degrees Celsius in some areas, -400 in others, temperatures that had no meaning in conventional physics. The 12 researchers were gone. No bodies, no signs of evacuation, no evidence of what had happened to them. The station's interior was pristine, preserved in the impossible cold. Equipment arranged as if the crew had simply vanished mid-task. But the rescue team reported something disturbing. When they entered certain rooms, they experienced temporal disorientation. Moments where they perceived events that hadn't happened yet, or that had happened hours ago. Brief glimpses of the Dome Fuji crew going about their work, visible for seconds before fading like ghosts. They're still here, the rescue team leader reported. But they exist in a different thermodynamic state. We can't interact with them because they've been transformed by the below-zero cold into something that doesn't experience time the way we do. They're frozen not in ice, but in a temperature regime where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Dome Fuji Station was permanently abandoned. The site was designated a contamination zone, off-limits to all future research. The official explanation cited structural instability and extreme environmental conditions, making no mention of impossible temperatures or thermodynamic anomalies that violated fundamental physics. The ancient ice cores were left in place, their below-zero cold slowly spreading through the bedrock beneath the abandoned station. Satellite monitoring shows the thermal anomaly expanding at approximately 1 meter per year, a slow infection of impossible cold spreading through Antarctica's deep ice, perhaps returning the region to conditions that existed naturally hundreds of thousands of years ago. Jonathan Pierce and his 11 colleagues remain at Dome Fuji, trapped in a temperature state below absolute zero, where the normal rules of physics don't apply. They exist in a timeless state, experiencing all moments of their transformation simultaneously, unable to escape the thermodynamic trap they accidentally created. Sometimes, during the deepest cold of Antarctic winter, research stations across the continent report brief temperature anomalies, spikes to impossible readings, moments where their sensors detect cold that shouldn't exist. The readings are dismissed as equipment errors, but they represent the slow spread of the below-zero regime, ancient conditions preserved in deep ice gradually being released into the modern world. The temperature that couldn't exist taught Antarctic researchers that the laws of physics they understand apply only to the narrow range of conditions humanity has experienced, that deep in Earth's ice are preserved states of matter from epochs when the planet was colder than modern science can explain, and that some thermodynamic regimes are so alien to current conditions that exposure to them doesn't kill. It transforms, converting normal matter and consciousness into states that exist outside linear time, frozen forever in temperatures below absolute zero, where past and future collapse into an eternal present of impossible cold. Story 8. The Blood Compass. Dr. Elizabeth Hart had been conducting magnetic field research at Concordia Station for 9 months when she discovered the compass that pointed to something other than magnetic north in December of 2023. As a geophysicist specializing in Earth's magnetic field, Elizabeth studied how the planet's magnetism behaved in extreme polar regions, where conventional navigation became unreliable and magnetic phenomena could be observed with unusual clarity. Concordia Station, jointly operated by France and Italy, sat on the Antarctic plateau at Dome C, one of the most remote locations on Earth, 100 kilometers from the nearest coastline. The station's isolation was absolute during winter, with temperatures dropping to negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit and complete darkness lasting 4 months. Even during summer, when Elizabeth was conducting her research, Concordia felt like humanity's furthest outpost, a tiny island of warmth and life in an infinite frozen desert. Elizabeth's work involved measuring subtle variations in Earth's magnetic field, looking for anomalies that might indicate unusual geological formations beneath the ice, or provide insights into how the magnetosphere behaved at extreme latitudes. She used an array of sensitive magnetometers positioned around the station, creating a network that could detect minute changes in magnetic field strength and orientation. On December 3rd, one of her remote magnetometers began reporting strange readings. The instrument, positioned 12 kilometers from the main station, was detecting a magnetic anomaly that shouldn't exist. A localized field so strong it was comparable to a magnetic pole, but mobile, moving slowly across the ice. Elizabeth reviewed the data with growing confusion. This is impossible. The readings suggest a magnetic source with field strength of 50,000 nanoteslas, moving at approximately 3 kilometers per hour. Nothing natural creates a magnetic field that's strong and mobile. Dr. Antoine Rousseau, Concordia's station leader, examined the readings. Could it be a piece of magnetized meteorite? If iron-nickel material from space impact was buried in the ice and now being moved by glacial flow? The movement is too fast for glacial flow, and the field strength is too consistent. This reads like an artificial magnetic beacon, but there's nothing out there. No expedition, no equipment deployment, nothing that could create this signature. Elizabeth decided to investigate personally. She organized a small expedition. Herself, Antoine, and Dr. Lars Bergstrom, a Swedish glaciologist, taking a tracked vehicle to intercept the anomalous magnetic source. They departed Concordia at 800 hours, navigating across the plateau ice using GPS and following the magnetometer readings. The journey took 3 hours. As they approached the anomaly's position, Elizabeth's handheld magnetic compass began behaving erratically. Instead of pointing north, the needle spun wildly, then locked onto a new direction. Not magnetic north, but towards something ahead of them, beyond their visual range. The magnetic field is so strong it's overriding Earth's natural field, Elizabeth said. The compass is pointing directly at the source now. They crested a gentle rise in the ice and saw it. A figure standing alone on the plateau, approximately 200 meters distant. human-shaped, motionless, dark against the white ice. Elizabeth felt immediate dread. They were over 1,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited location. No one should be out here walking alone in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. They approached cautiously. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge their presence. As they drew closer, details became clear, and what Elizabeth saw made her stomach clench with horror. It was a person, or had been. The body was frozen solid, preserved by the extreme cold, standing upright as if still walking. The clothes were decades old, thermal gear from the 1980s based on the design. But the most disturbing feature was the chest, where the fabric had been torn open, revealing a cavity that had been hollowed out. Inside the chest cavity, where the heart should have been, was a compass. Not a modern GPS unit, but an old magnetic compass, its brass case darkened with age. The compass was embedded directly into the frozen tissues, integrated with the body as if it had grown there rather than being placed. And the compass was glowing, a faint bioluminescence that pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. "Mon Dieu," Antoine whispered. "What is this?" Elizabeth's magnetometer went wild, registering field strengths that shouldn't be possible from such a small source. The compass in the corpse's chest was generating a magnetic field orders of magnitude stronger than any permanent magnet could produce. It was as if the device had become a miniature magnetic pole, warping space-time around itself to create impossible field strength. Lars checked the body's identification tags. "This is Dr. Richard Morrison, reported missing from Vostok Station in 1987. He was a geologist who disappeared during a solo expedition to survey subglacial topography. The search teams never found him." "He's been standing here for 36 years?" Elizabeth said. "How is that possible? The body should have fallen, been buried by snow accumulation." But as she examined the ice around the corpse, Elizabeth understood. The ground beneath Morrison's feet showed unusual crystallization patterns. The ice had been reorganized, fused into a pedestal that held the body upright. Something had preserved Morrison in this standing position, maintained him as a permanent fixture on the plateau. The compass pulsed again, and Elizabeth felt a strange pull, not physical but mental, and urging to look in the direction the compass needle pointed. She turned and saw nothing but empty ice stretching to the horizon. But the pull intensified, a compulsion to walk in that direction, to follow where the compass led. "We need to take the body back to Concordia," Antoine said. "This is a recovery operation now. Morrison's remains should be returned to his family." But when they tried to move the body, they couldn't. Morrison's feet were fused to the ice pedestal with bonds stronger than natural freezing could create. They would need cutting tools, heat, hours of work to free him. Elizabeth made a decision. "We leave the body for now and return with proper equipment. But I'm taking compass readings documenting the magnetic field," and she stopped mid-sentence. The compass in Morrison's chest was moving. The needle, which had been pointing northeast, was rotating slowly, tracking something. Elizabeth followed its direction and saw 3 more figures standing on the ice in the distance, dark shapes arranged in a line leading toward the horizon. "There are more," Elizabeth said, her voice barely steady. "More bodies with compasses." They drove to the next figure and found another frozen corpse, another compass embedded in the chest, another magnetic anomaly generating impossible field strength. The identification showed Dr. Sarah Kowalski, missing from McMurdo Station in 1993. Then a third body, Dr. James Wu, no relation to Elizabeth's colleague, missing from Davis Station in 2001. And a fourth, Dr. Anna Petrov, missing from Novolazarevskaya Station in 2015. Each body stood upright on an ice pedestal. Each had a compass where their heart should be. Each compass glowed with bioluminescence and generated magnetic fields that violated known physics. And each compass pointed to the next body in the line, creating a chain of magnetic waypoints leading across the Antarctic plateau towards some distant destination. It's a trail, Lars realized. The compasses are marking a path. Each one points to the next, creating a navigation chain for something or someone to follow. Leading where? Antoine asked. Elizabeth checked her GPS and plotted the direction indicated by the compass chain. If we follow this bearing for approximately 180 kilometers, we reach the Vostok subglacial highlands, a region where seismic surveys have detected unusual subsurface formations. There's nothing there officially, no stations, no research sites. We need to report this, Antoine said. This is beyond our scope. Multiple bodies, magnetic anomalies, evidence of something systematically placing these. His radio cut out. All their radios simultaneously lost signal, overwhelmed by electromagnetic interference from the compass bodies. Their GPS units flickered and died. Even the vehicle's electronic system stuttered, fighting against the impossible magnetic fields surrounding them. They were cut off from Concordia, stranded in the presence of 4 frozen corpses that had been transformed into magnetic waypoints by something unknown, for purposes they couldn't fathom. Elizabeth felt the mental pull again, stronger now, a compulsion emanating from the compasses. They wanted to be followed. They wanted someone to complete the trail, to walk the 180 kilometers from body to body until reaching whatever waited at the end of the chain. We have to resist it, Elizabeth said, recognizing the compulsion for what it was. Some form of electromagnetic influence affecting their neural chemistry, making them want to follow the compass trail. Whatever placed these bodies here, whatever is at the end of this chain, it's calling for followers. Every person who disappeared was drawn to follow the trail, and they became part of it, transformed into the next waypoint. But resisting was becoming difficult. The mental pull intensified with each passing moment, as if the compasses were increasing their influence, adapting to overcome the team's resistance. Elizabeth could feel her will eroding, her determination to return to Concordia fading, replaced by an overwhelming need to walk northeast, to follow where the compasses pointed. Lars was already walking. He'd climbed out of the vehicle and was trudging across the ice toward the next compass body, his movements mechanical, compelled. Antoine was fighting it, his hands gripping the vehicle's steering wheel with white-knuckle intensity, but Elizabeth could see him losing the battle. Elizabeth made a desperate choice. She grabbed her handheld magnetometer and overloaded it, sending the device's maximum current through its coils, creating a pulse of electromagnetic energy that interfered with the compass fields for just a moment. The compulsion broke. Lars stopped walking, confused about why he was outside the vehicle. Antoine gasped and started the engine, adrenaline overriding the magnetic influence. They fled. Elizabeth kept the magnetometer running at maximum power, draining its batteries to maintain interference with the compass fields. They drove back toward Concordia, GPS non-functional, navigating by sun position and dead reckoning. Behind them, the compass bodies stood in their chain, glowing faintly, calling to anyone who might pass within range, marking a trail that led to something at the Vostok subglacial highlands that needed followers, needed bodies to transform into waypoints extending its reach across Antarctica. When they reached Concordia 8 hours later, longer than the outbound journey because they'd been forced to navigate without GPS, Elizabeth immediately reported the discovery. But when a recovery team was dispatched to retrieve the bodies, they found nothing. The 4 compass corpses were gone, vanished from the ice as if they'd never existed. Satellite imagery showed no trace of them. The pedestals that had held them upright had disappeared. Only Elizabeth's photographs and magnetometer readings proved the bodies had ever been there. They moved, Elizabeth realized, The compasses relocated the bodies, repositioning the chain to avoid detection and recovery. They're still out there, still calling, but in different locations now, spread across the plateau in a pattern we can't predict. Concordia Station implemented new protocols, mandatory buddy systems for all external work, GPS trackers that would alert if anyone strayed from approved areas, and most important, magnetic field monitors that would warn if anyone came near the compass body's signature field strength. But over the following months, 2 more researchers went missing during routine expeditions. Both vanished without trace despite GPS tracking and radio contact. Search teams found nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no evidence of what had happened to them. Elizabeth knows the truth. The missing researchers encountered the compass chain, fell under its compulsion, followed it to its terminus at the Vostok subglacial highlands. There they were transformed, their bodies preserved, their chests hollowed out, compasses implanted where their hearts had been. And then they were positioned as new waypoints, extending the chain, increasing its reach across Antarctica. The magnetic trail is growing. Each person who follows it adds to its length, becomes part of the navigation system leading to whatever exists beneath the Vostok subglacial highlands. Something that needs human bodies, needs them preserved and positioned in specific patterns, needs them transformed into biological mechanical hybrids that can generate impossible magnetic fields and call to others, drawing more followers to extend the chain. Elizabeth transferred to a research position in Australia, refusing to return to Antarctica. But she monitors magnetic field data from Antarctic stations, watching for the signature patterns of the compass bodies. The anomalies appear in different locations, mobile and adaptive, always maintaining the chain structure but repositioning to avoid detection. The blood compass taught Elizabeth that Antarctica contains purposes beyond human understanding, that something beneath the ice is collecting bodies and transforming them into components of a vast magnetic navigation system, that the frozen continent serves functions for intelligences that view humans not as people, but as raw materials, flesh to be preserved, chests to be hollowed, hearts to be replaced with glowing compasses that point not toward magnetic north but toward destinations where humans go and never return, transformed into frozen waypoints in an expanding network of biological beacons calling across the ice to anyone who might hear, compelling them to follow, to complete the trail, to become the next body standing alone on the plateau with a compass where their hearts should be, glowing faintly in the eternal cold, pointing forever towards something in the Vostok subglacial highlands that builds its chain one frozen corpse at a time.